Thank you, Bennett, and thank you, Arvind, for your presentations. I think before we open up, I wanted to just ask a couple of questions to both of you and get your response. One is that people will say, well, a lot of this is old news. The human rights problems are known in Equatorial Guinea, but the trend line is improving. How would you describe the trend line in, say, the last 2 or 3 years in terms of human rights? And the second question I would have is related to EITI. And on the one hand, we could see EITI as sort of this Trojan horse for improving good governance. You create a small space, and then over time the space would get bigger. But on the other hand, you could see EITI as sort of creating this Potemkin village where quote-unquote civil society groups like the Musicians Association participate, and that, so you have this sort of show process. So how do you see EITI working, and especially in the context as in Human Rights Watch's report, you describe that there are laws on the books against freedom of association. You have to notify the government if 10 or more people are meeting. How do you see that EITI playing out?
You want to do the first?
Yes,
I can do the second.
I mean, I don't think. I think whatever very modest incremental improvements have taken place in terms of human rights in Equatorial Guinea, they don't really negate the fact that the overall human rights situation in the country is poor. Just last year, the parliamentary elections showed that President Obiang's party and his allies won 99 out of 100 seats. In a prior presidential election, Obiang claimed that it was a democracy because he only won 97% of the vote. So I think in fundamental ways where the government could be held accountable by its own people, those changes aren't occurring. Moreover, the most recent data, and I know Hess has some new data about some of its programs, but the most recent UNDP human development data does not show a trend line where public investment is leading to major improvements in social services or social indicators. So I think that there have been nominal improvements in human rights, but if you look at institutions of accountability for the government and whether or not oil revenue has been invested in a way that will progressively realize people's economic social rights, that isn't happening. And if we look here at the Center for Economic Social Rights, which is all on the back table, and their data relating to development indicators, it's horrifying. It doesn't show any evidence that the government is either committed to or actually improving the lives of citizens in Equatorial Guinea, and whatever nominal improvements they might make or show projects they might have, which might be useful in and of themselves, it doesn't show evidence that there are major improvements taking place. And fundamentally, it comes down to the fact that the government really isn't accountable through institutions or through the electoral process or anywhere else. And that's really the test. And it's more of a test today because the price of oil is falling, and Equatorial Guinea is not slated to have major new discoveries coming online, so they have to maximize the use of their existing revenue in the short term.
I'll just one comment on that question, and then I'll take on EITI. I agree with everything that Arvind just said, and I would just assert that while the government of Equatorial Guinea is certainly not the systematically murderous regime that it may have been 20 years ago, it remains an abusive one, and the country remains a repressive, corrupt government. And even if the repression is diminished somewhat, the corruption is deepened at the same time, and there just is no fundamental rule of law, let alone consistent respect for human rights, let alone genuine space for civil society, let alone for political opposition, independent, credible political opposition to emerge. On the EITI front, look, the EITI validation criteria are crystal clear that there must be involvement at every step of the process, from the formulation of the EITI work plan all the way through every aspect of implementation of that plan. That engaged throughout the process are figures from civil society who have genuine independence from the government. It's laid out with crystal clarity. For that reason, the civil society members, all of whom worked together under the broad umbrella of the Publish What You Pay Coalition on the EITI board, and I was one of them until 2 months ago representing Oxfam, have been consistent and persistent in making clear our view that while we are not singling out Equatorial Guinea, we would not hold it to a higher standard than any other candidate government in the EITI process. We would hold it to the same standard of other governments, candidate governments in that process. Moreover, we've made clear our view over and over again that we do not see those elements, legitimate independent elements of civil society at present in place in Equatorial Guinea. We frankly question the legitimacy of that civil society participation, although we did agree to certifying EG's candidature status because we thought that that was an important signal to try to encourage progress exactly along these lines in the 2-year window during which EG, like all other candidate countries, has to demonstrate validation. So, you know, I have high confidence that the EITI board, and not just the civil society representatives on it, will hold EG to that same standard it holds other governments to over the next year as validation decisions, including with respect to Equatorial Guinea, are made. It's not in the interest of EITI to allow it to look like it's fostering a series of Potemkin villages around the world. It's just not going to happen. So I'm not prejudging the decision that the EITI board will make next year about EITI's validation, but I can tell you that the view of the civil society representatives on the board has been thus far that those civil society elements on the ground have not been present in an incredible and independent way that would point with confidence to validation.
I'd just like to add to that. I mean, I think this is a major test for EITI itself. I mean, if you look at the first country that was declared EITI compliant in February of 2009, it was Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
And less than a month later, the president pushed through a constitutional change that will allow him to be president for life. So what we're seeing is that while there may be immense progress on revenue transparency, it doesn't necessarily correlate to better progress on either reducing corruption or increasing accountability for government or improving human rights. And EITI, in a way, is the poster child of what potentially could go wrong or is going wrong with an oil-rich country or a resource-rich country. And if somehow Equatorial Guinea manages to be validated or move down the chain without significant human rights improvements or significant improvements in transparency or accountability, it's a real blow to EITI itself.
Absolutely.
Because what it will say is that the initiative doesn't solve the fundamental problems that certainly civil society first got involved in the first place.